Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And I'm joined today by Michael. Michael, can you please share a little bit about yourself and what you do?
Thank you, Dr. Gleb. I am the Chief Human Resource Officer for Trellix. Trellix is a cybersecurity organization firm that has about 40,000 clients, and we are at the forefront of some of the AI
Hmm.
embedded in our systems for cybersecurity.
Now, tell me a little bit more. You're the Chief Human Resource Officer. Tell me a little bit more about how Trellix uses generative AI internally and what your journey was on generative AI.
So we use generative AI, or for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to use the blanket just AI in a variety of ways. We use it both internally in some of our internal systems, but we also use it externally
Mhm.
in some of our products to actually help our clients protect themselves from adversaries.
So give me a little bit of some examples of how you started using generative AI internally, and then we'll talk a little bit about externally later once we get the internal context. Tell me about how you started using it. What are some use cases? What are some examples?
Sure. I mean, I think the easiest way to think about AI in my mind, I've been actually at the forefront of some of the AI integrations both in this company and other organizations,
Mhm.
which I'm glad to speak to as we get deeper into the conversation. The primary use that we have, if I think about it, is taking rote or common things that
Mhm.
are learned by the system, right? And then using it as a way to speed up processes. A good
Mhm.
example of that, let's say in my own world, like a chatbot. Someone has a question about benefits or a question around, holidays or things like that, things that are very easily learned by the system that
Mhm.
then someone can query and they get a human type response to that query.
Mhm.
Hey, when is Labor Day celebrated? Do we get, what are the days around Easter that we get off? And things like that. And the
Mhm.
AI around it is kind of interesting because if you think about it, it's not just that day off, it's the AI understanding who you are. So
Mhm.
we operate in 20 some odd, 26 countries. And if you have
Mhm.
to be in a country, it picks up the right calendar,
Mhm.
brings it to the discussion. Then it looks at the statutory days that are off, that have holidays, and
Mhm.
then applies it to your specific information, right?
Mhm.
So that's a very, I would say, very simplistic use
Mhm.
of AI. And then we have more complicated, or what I would say, more mission critical things that it does in
Mhm.
for internal purposes, like we have a series of development work that we do to get our products out
Mhm.
the door. And there are components to that that we use AI to actually speed up the
Mhm.
development process. If there are very rote things that code does
Mhm.
to accomplish a certain thing, AI can actually speed that process up.
Mhm.
And for me, the interesting thing is that it's not just AI singularly, it's the combination of AI and
Mhm.
a human that really bring it to bear.
Mhm. Well, let's talk about the human. Now, humans have shown anxiety around generative AI, but especially generative AI. There's a lot of concerns about job displacement, a lot of concerns about work automation. People fear for their jobs. There's concerns. Tell me a little bit more about how generative AI has been treated by employees at Trellix.
Yeah, the way I've thought about it, and it's interesting, the way you bring that up, maybe I'll continue down two paths so you see how they interact. So in the case of the first example I gave you around a chatbot, what it
Mhm.
actually has done is it has allowed the people that would normally answer those questions to take higher level work in our
Mhm.
people services team,
Mhm.
more value added work For example, making sure that our structures are right, making sure that
mm,
we're even more timely in what I would call the
mhm,
tier two questions, very specific questions around someone's health plans, which
mhm,
I wouldn't feel comfortable having an AI have access to your personal health records to be able to give you an answer. I could have a human do that. Now I have more people being able
mhm,
to do those kind of things, which gets the answer faster, quicker, and by the way, more efficiently. And it doesn't mean that I
mm,
let people go. What it means is that maybe I don't have to hire as much, or as people attrit, I don't have to then continually backfill,
mm,
or I can actually retrain folks for higher level work. And I will give you a specific
mhm,
example. As of today, out of my team, there's been at least three folks from that people services team that I've been able to promote outside of that people services team,
mm,
higher level work within the organization as HR business partners or as
mhm, mhm,
professionals, rather than have them answering questions about when your holiday is, right?
mm,
And I think that's really critical. So that's one example of how
mm,
that. So that team in particular feels really energized about it, right? Because it means they can do bigger, higher level, more
mhm, mhm,
complicated, more visible work. Now on the other side, I think, for us, cybersecurity is an ever evolving environment.
mm,
And at first there was some trepidation around it, but the
mm,
realization is that there is so much more work that has to be done to maintain the efficiency of the code,
mm,
that you need people involved, and they're
mhm,
being put out of that spot where it's really rote development, and
mhm,
they're actually getting into the design as opposed to sort of enacting or working on
mhm,
something particular. And that has added a real sense of purpose and drive to the organization.
mhm,
The other thing that we didn't really talk about, as we think about how it manages internally, it is also a confidence boost. It's also
mm,
being proud because we have tools that are now customer facing, that
mhm,
are putting Trellix at the forefront of AI and
mm,
cybersecurity, and our teams see that, right?
mm,
And it's not like everyone's doing AI and we're not, right? And
mm,
so now they actually have a set of tools that are touching the customer that makes
mm,
them feel contemporary because they are.
mm. Tell me a little bit more about how people learned how to use generative AI. So you had to teach them these tools. What were the techniques that you used to help convey the information about how to use generative AI, which of course is different than machine learning AI, which requires data
Sure.
scientists and big models. Generative AI is much more dependent on individuals experimenting and figuring out use cases that work for them. How did you teach them how to use these tools?
I think you said it really in the question, which is they have to use it.
Hmm.
Now, yes, it's different, but they need a set of data. The AI needs a set of data that it works from.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
sort of from my early days to today, there's been a dramatic change in how that works, right?
Hmm.
So two things. One, let's understand the layer of data that the generative AI system is drawing from to be
Hmm.
able to make sure that they're giving you and composing things in a way that makes sense.
Hmm.
And so that was the beginning of our teaching, which
Hmm.
is work on the,
Hmm.
the underlying data sets that the generative AI is pulling from, and make sure that that's right.
Hmm.
Make sure that that's accurate, right? Then, with that sort of understanding of where it's pulling from, then now let's test it. Let's
Hmm.
ask questions. Let's try to solve answers that would take a long time to answer, or
Hmm.
more complicated answers, and see what the responses are. And then take those responses and go back to the
Hmm.
data and say, did that actually play out the way we thought it would play? Did it give us a unique answer to something which we wouldn't have come up with that
Hmm.
actually makes better sense? And what we found in the beginning, maybe it was 50% of the time. Then over
Hmm.
time, it was like 80% of the time.
Hmm.
right? And now we're in a range where you're looking at 90% of the time, it's giving you exactly what you want. And now it's
Hmm.
the last mile. And
Hmm.
sort of, I'm trying to think of an example for you that was highlighted. If I take a look at certain queries that you would do, let's say, for example, in terms of predicting something,
Hmm.
right? That's the thing that we really want to get at. Can you predict that if this happens, something else is going to happen?
Hmm.
And that really depends on having a good broad set of data. In the
Hmm.
beginning, we get these weird responses and weird because we didn't see the connection, right?
Hmm.
And so someone went back and said, "How do we let's test that a bit."
Hmm.
And what we found is, oh my goodness, generative AI actually saw a connection
Hmm.
where a human being didn't and actually gave us a more efficient answer,
Hmm.
a more in-depth, accurate answer,
Hmm.
right? And that was at the 50% stage. Now imagine where we are now, where
Hmm.
we're in the 90% stage, how much better that's gotten.
Hmm.
But it does
And so
require
the
you to go back and look every so often to make
hmm.
sure that that's right, right? And that's where
Hmm.
the human comes in.
Now you're at the 90% stage. There's still 10%, and I want to talk a little bit about these hallucinations, these biases, these ethics issues. How did you address hallucinations? How did you address issues around bias? What is your approach to AI ethics and governance and risk management?
So I think there's a lot in that. And I had
Hmm.
told you at the beginning of the interview here that I've been working with AI for a while.
Hmm.
And I learned something really early on, which is the underlying data is critical, number one.
Hmm.
Number two, um, um, you have to continually go back and test and look at. Not every
Hmm.
single answer, but you should have a standardized process by which you go back in and say, let's test these answers, let's make sure
Hmm.
they're accurate, that they're reasonable. I had an instance once where I hired a service, and their whole premise was that they could predict an interviewer and a candidate their success rate in the company.
Hmm.
And I thought that was a fascinating thing, and we piloted it. And they gave us great sort of great insight, but the bias was really built into it because of the way
Hmm.
the data was fed. And so I'll give you a perfect example.
Hmm.
This firm that I worked at, they were in marketing information and analytics.
Hmm.
And what the AI program was built to do was take a look at every employee who worked at the company in marketing information or analytics, and what schools they went to,
Hmm.
with a whole bunch of geodemographic information, and so the AI weighted those schools more heavily.
Hmm.
They weighted, the prior experiences they
Hmm.
had, as well as some geodemographic information, and which built a bias because those schools that they picked, because marketing information and marketing analytics
Hmm.
weren't in a lot of diverse schools, gave us a subset of candidates that all look the same.
Hmm.
And that's not what we were looking for. We were looking
Hmm.
prediction of success in a
Hmm.
role, right?
Hmm.
And so that's what I mean about pulling the data set has to be right, right? It
Hmm.
has to be tested and validated before you get to that next stage. Otherwise, it's going to pull. So everybody that went to this school got a higher rating than someone that didn't.
Hmm.
Everyone that had these type of jobs beforehand had a higher rating than those that didn't. And since those were nascent businesses, if you think about marketing analytics and research, there weren't a lot of diverse schools that offered those
Hmm.
courses. So you found out that you were only getting white males between the age of 25 and 36,
Hmm.
right? And that's not what you want. You want the best
Yeah.
athlete at all times. So that's what I mean about the
Mhm.
data. And so carrying that knowledge base into my current role and
Mhm.
some of the things that we're looking at, that's exactly what we test for. That
Mhm.
is the data that that's being pulled the right data? Is it can it be validated externally?
Mhm.
And that's one of the ways you drive that kind of cohesiveness and remove some of the biases. And by the way,
Mhm.
it's not too different a process from hallucinations,
Mhm.
right? Making connections where connections are not clear,
Mhm.
sometimes have breakthrough thoughts, right? Have breakthrough
Mhm.
answers, but it can also lead to hallucinations because they'll make connections that just don't aren't there, right?
Mhm. Makes sense. Now, how do you measure the impact of generative AI? What are the metrics that you use? What are the KPIs that you use to evaluate its effectiveness?
Well, it really depends on sort of what it is what
Mm.
you're mission critical, right? For me in that chat box explanation that we had, which is really simplistic, is how many of those answers end up moving up to a tier two type of engagement. In
Ah.
other words, how many times does this get answered the first time,
Mhm.
right? We also have, surveys that automatically get pumped out after an answer is given, so you can
Mm.
say, "Oh, it answered me, it didn't answer me." So we got some good analytics around that. That's pretty straightforward and as simplistic as
Mhm.
you. The more complicated is the conversation we had around development, right? Around
Mm.
rote development, which is, how many lines of code?
Mhm.
How efficient is that code?
Mm.
How much rework was
Mm.
involved in that code? And did it answer what it was supposed to do? Did it do what it's supposed to do in the time frame that we wanted it? How fast did
Mhm.
it do it? Right. So those are some of the metrics. On the product side, it could be
Mhm.
something as simple as an ROI, right?
Mm.
If it's part of a product set and the client used it, and we're able to show that because they used it, it led to other commercial opportunity,
Mm.
that is a great way to look at it as well.
Now, t turning a little bit more, you mentioned your clients a little bit throughout the conversation, but a little bit more explicitly about your clients. How are your clients feeling about generative AI integration? I know some heavily regulated clients in finance and healthcare who I worked with, they have a very slow approach to generative AI, and they have difficulty evaluating their vendors who provide them with generative AI tools because they're in their heavily regulated industries, whereas others, of course, move quickly. So, what is your approach to dealing with different types of clients and their generative AI policies?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think we've seen that quite a bit. I think the
Mhm.
internal work, we haven't had any resistance to that because the
Mhm.
stuff we do is mission critical. It's based on, is it doing what it said it's supposed to do in a way that it's supposed to do it? That's easy. There's no issue around that.
Mhm.
I think when it comes to things like external products, which require the customer's engagement to
Mhm.
get an answer, we're a little bit more careful about deploying
Mhm.
that in less mature organizations,
Mhm.
uh, and obviously regulated areas, simply because of what you just said. There's a comfort level with having people involved, but
Mhm.
by the way, there's also a cost imperative.
Mhm.
I think that's the paradigm that I'm seeing shift right now,
Mhm.
which is you can get more for a lot less using tools that have AI in them rather than having a person
Mhm.
sit at it, right? So if you think about this concept of threat detection, having
Mhm.
an AI sort of system be able to look at all the telemetry that you're
Mhm.
getting in from all your networks and everything else and
Mhm.
say, hey, this is odd. This looks different. You need to dig into that,
Mhm.
as opposed to having an individual sit in front of a screen logging all these things that are happening, simultaneously
Hmm.
over perhaps thousands of nodes, those thousands of systems, is less efficient and
Hmm.
more error prone potentially, right?
Hmm.
So that's where we're seeing it shift. And it's more expensive, right? Because now I've got a person that I've got to have there doing that. I've got to
Hmm.
have the real estate where they sit on it. I've got to have
Hmm.
benefits and other costs associated with that individual. And so I think that's shifting over time, and we'll see a greater use of generative AI in a variety of these mission critical areas.
And talking about greater use of generative AI, as we see agentic AI develop more and more, what's your prediction for what will happen in the next couple of years with generative AI adoption for inside your firm, but also externally for your customers? What do you see and what do you think will happen?
I mean, I would say that for us, obviously, we're going to continue to use
Hmm.
generative AI. We'll continue to look for ways that we can deploy it in a way that's helpful for our customers,
Hmm.
right? We
Hmm.
always have to have a customer-centric view about how we do these things. We're never going to risk doing something which limits the ability of our clients to protect themselves, right? So
Hmm.
let's put that in a different box. What I've seen from my peers, customers, is that it is accelerating at a very fast pace,
Hmm.
very fast pace. And I think what you'll see is that within the next 3 to 5 years, it'll be deployed in almost every single organization
Hmm.
in a stack, meaning
Hmm.
it'll start with things like the chatbot, very simple kind of
Hmm.
approaches because it saves on manpower, it saves on time, and then will grow in significance and sophistication till it
Hmm.
actually faces their customers.
Hmm.
And I'm seeing that across the variety of orgs that I deal with.
And as we finish up, is there anything else that you want to share that you haven't yet talked about around generative AI adoption for you internally or for your products that you're providing to clients?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one thing that I'd emphasize is
Mm.
the data that this is,
Mhm.
right? And if you think about,
Mhm.
different areas, if you're in marketing, we're not, I think we're not looking to plagiarize. We want people to bring ideas to the table.
Mhm.
But we want to make sure that we use AI in a way that speeds up our
Mhm.
ability to serve our clients, our
Mhm.
customers, that provide bigger, better capabilities for our customers on behalf of our customers. And that's really how we use it. We're not
Mhm.
looking at it as a way to save money or sort of do less for our client. We want to do more, and that's a way
Mhm.
to expand our capabilities with our customers. And it all depends on the underlying data. A company like
Mhm.
ours has a rich history for the past 15, 20 years of all this data that we've collected around,
Mhm.
adversaries and people doing bad things
Mhm.
to systems that we can bring to bear in an AI system
Mhm.
that really is helpful. And I think as long as companies have that mindset,
Mhm.
I think it opens up a whole new world for us.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, Michael. This was very, very helpful.
Awesome. Thank you, Doctor. And again, I'm always thrilled to be part of this, and I love seeing these both on this topic and other topics.
Thank you, Michael. And thank you to the audience for checking out another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show. Please make sure to subscribe wherever you checked out the show and leave a review. It helps other people discover the show and helps us improve the show. And if you have any questions, email me at gleb, Gleb, at disasteravoidanceexperts.com.